Hi, this is Beth with Around the Table Yarns. Today is Sweater Club, and we are going to be working on the sleeves and actually really focusing on blocking the pieces. So the sleeves are quite straightforward. They are cast on with a rib at the beginning, and then they're increased as you go. It's not really a big technical issue. So what we did focus on today in class was doing blocking, because all of your pieces will need to be blocked by the time we get to next month, which is when we are going to start sewing things together. So does anybody have any questions about sleeves? Everybody's muted. So the sleeves, you just follow the instructions for your size. And then the one thing I did talk to people about today with the sleeve increases is that you can do increases on a sleeve really any way that you want to. And if you do them visibly, if you choose to do an increase that is visible, and one way to do that is by doing a yarn over or a knit in the front and the back. And what that does is it allows you to see where your increases are and to keep track of them more easily. So what happens with the sleeves is that you have to do an increase at the beginning and the end of each row every fourth row or every sixth row, depending on which size you're doing and which part of the pattern. And so if you do a visible increase, it's very helpful to have to be able to look down and see where your increases were. Another technique is to use closable or locking stitch markers that you can string together in a chain. So if you have 8 increases to do, you can have 8 stitch markers that you have strung together, and you put the first one on the first increase you do, and then you move the second one to the next one, and then you move the third one to the next one with the chain hanging off of it. And it gives you a visual. Looking down, you can see, oh, there's my first one, here's my second one, here's my third one, and I have 5 more to do because there's 5 more stitch markers hanging off of that chain. So that was another technique that we talked about. But really, if you have any questions about sleeve shaping, that's something we're happy to answer. And in the meantime, blocking is something that not everybody is super comfortable with. So I'm going to switch to the video we did this morning and play it for you. And I can stop if anybody has any questions and answer the questions. So unmute if you have a question and just go ahead and ask.
You to know. Okay, so we're using not cold because it makes my hands ache. So if anybody else gets the ache in your hand, and then not hot. And you don't want to use hot, again, I'm just saying this for the video, because it opens up the fiber scales and it can increase the chance of felting. Notice I filled the basin first, and I'm going to put my soak wash in. Ooh, you always use the soap. I like soak because it is rinse free. So that's as much as you need. A little dribble is plenty. So it's rinse free and it has natural materials that are used in it. It has a pleasant scent, but the scent goes away after the item dries. So it's nice to know that you've used it, and it sort of freshens if you have dogs, you know, people who are smokers, you know, whatever. It can make it cleaner, sort of smelling, and it lets you know you did actually block it. So I'm just putting that around in there. And I'm going to do one, well, I guess I can do both, but I'm going to do one piece. Here is my front. And you can see it's ready to be soaked. So when it goes in, there's a lot of bubbles. There's a lot of air trapped in the fibers because it's, oh, my watch because it's not waterproof. It is not a solid yarn. It's a hollow, you know, there are hollows in it. When it's applied, there's air that's trapped in it. So even as I'm doing this, even as it's sitting underneath there, you can see the air trapped inside. You can see that it's still trying to float to the top. What you want is for all the air to be out, so that when you press down on it, bubbles stop coming out, and so that it lays on the bottom of the basin. Some people will tell you to soak it for an hour, 45 minutes, half an hour, however long. So this is a point where you could stop and go away and do something else for a minute. So you could put it in here, you could flatten it down as much as you want to, and we could leave it and stop doing that. But because we're doing this as a demonstration and we're filming it, I'm just going to keep gently squeezing to get all the air out as possible, as much air out as possible. And if we were Julia Child, I would have already done this. And I pull out my other one. And then we would move on. So we're going to imagine that we've left it to soak.
For how long do you want?
I leave it for about at least 30 minutes and an hour. And if I get busy doing something else and I come back to it later, it's not going to hurt it at all.
And you're blacking each piece separately before you
You can put them all in.
together.
You could put them all in.
But we're blacking before we put together.
We're going to block before we put together.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'll see why when this is done.
Mhm.
So I'm really holding it down. I don't see any more bubbles coming up generally. Oh, maybe a few actually. A few. So I'm still pressing out some air. It's not coming to the surface as readily as it was. And the idea is if you've ever seen like curly hair get wet so that it's straight, completely straight, that's kind of what we're trying to do. All of the differences in your stitches that come from being tense or not tense when you're knitting. So I'm not really stretching or twisting this, I'm just squeezing, gently squeezing to get as much air out of it as possible. I want the fibers to be as saturated as possible, and I want them to be as limp as possible when I take it out of here. Okay, also you may see dye. If you have hand-dyed yarn, you may see dye in the water. So this is a nice way to get rid of any excess dye. All right, that is pretty much laying there. So if this were my kitchen sink, I would just pull up the drain. I'm just going to drain out the water. And that's another thing I like to do. So you can see it is totally saturated. Now, if I were, I'm going to continue to squeeze to get out any, but notice I'm not wringing it, I'm not twisting it, I'm not manipulating it, I am just applying pressure. This is a blocking towel or a blocking, I don't know,
I think it's out.
towel. So there's, just from squeezing it, I got that much more out. You saw those flapping towels too. And what I like about them is I use bath towels at home, or I have used bath towels at home, and I usually have to change them because you need to do it more than once. It's more absorbent than a cotton towel. And then I can hang it up to dry. I don't have to stick it in the dryer. So I just put it over a peg over my guest room closet door, and then it dries on its own, and I'm done. Okay, so when you transfer it, don't hold it up, don't stretch it out. You want it to be as not manipulated as possible. And I'm just rolling it a little bit out, and then roll the whole thing up. And I put as much pressure on it as I can at home, I might kneel on it. But you can see that this is going to absorb a lot of the liquid, a lot of the water that's in there.
So do you want to follow this line
You might want to do it again,
or to switch to another
and
towel?
switch to another
I
towel.
have 2 beach towels and I
Yeah.
usually go through like 2 beach towels. So I can roll it.
So this is a microfiber and it will dry on its own. So I'm just gonna hang it up.
But you don't.
I don't need to be putting it in the dryer, so it saves me a little bit of energy. Okay, so this is more or less dry. More or less,
You don't have a towel or that under it when you're washing it.
not at this point. It's not dripping wet anymore. So you can feel how wet it is. It's still saturated, but it is now at the point where it can dry. So the first thing I do, yeah, I'm gonna want to turn this around. I need another square. This you just turn. Oh, I think it's gonna still need to be, unless I go this way. Go that way. Let's do it. All right. Now, the issue that I have now is that naturally the sides roll under. So I'm actually gonna flip it to the wrong side so I can unroll those sides easily when I'm pinning. And I want to create straight lines on the sides. I don't want them to be like bulged out. All right, so now it's laying flat. We use the blocking pins, and one of the reasons I really like them is because I tend to do this. So I get it right at the end, and then I can go straight. So I want that to be the 90-degree angle. My sweater bottom. And then I can do along the bottom. And so what I like about this is it does not allow it to make scallops. So when you use just single pins and unless you pin very close together, you tend to get these like holes on the knitted item.
And so you're putting those as close together as you need so it doesn't scallop.
Yeah.
And then are you doing that to the size that you were doing? So you didn't measure.
I haven't yet. I'm gonna measure it now that it's pinned across. It should be the size I wanted. Remember, I was doing mine extra wide, and I think I was looking for around 34. There is one on the table.
Mhm.
So I'm at 29, which is 58. That's plenty wide. Honestly can't remember which this was. I don't remember. I don't think this would be. It would be really wide if it was 34, and that looks plenty wide to me, and 58 around is plenty big. Okay, so that's my bottom, and then I'm gonna work up the top. Now I do have more of these, but what we really want is to create this nice flat side. You see how I'm laying it down and then putting them in and creating that line. And And then this one is gonna be further out because that's where our armhole came out. There's my nice smooth line going at an angle. I'm running out of blockers, so soon I'm going to be using pens. But I do tend to move things around. Like I might pull this one from here to hold up the neck. But you get the sense of what we're doing here? So you do that all the way around the outside. And then look at it. Make sure it looks like a sweater. Because if it doesn't, you know, you want to come back and adjust. So I might pull, if that looks nice and wide, I might start pulling from here. And this is where you're actually doing some adjustment because this line, you want it again to be a 90-degree angle from the bottom.
Thank you.
You need them?
Thank you.
If you want it. There's a little masking. So this is not a perfect blocking for this job, but.
So you could only block one piece at all. I mean,
This you got a lot.
So,
but you have all kinds of pins.
So you can block two things at a time. Because once I have this done, I could do the other piece and pin it to the top.
Oh, on top of there.
And then it's exactly the same size. And then I take a fan.
That's a good idea.
So either I do it in a room with a ceiling fan, or I do it with a table fan blowing on it. And I've actually set this up. You know, I put my blocking mats together and then set them up and just had the fan blowing straight on it. I have a block and roll, which is an old, it came out several years ago, and it's a styrofoam, not styrofoam, but foam based, like sewing foam based, and it's got a grid on it, so it actually has the lines on it, so you can see.
Oh, that's nice.
Grids, an inch, it's an inch by.
So we have a blocking cloth that is a gingham cloth, and all of the gingham is an inch. So you can see the squares, and you could lay that over this if
Do
you
you
wanted
put a
to.
fan even if it's a single layer?
Yes, I do have fan because my cats will jump on it.
Is it okay if it's, I have a heater that we keep in my dogs and it heat fine also, it's, okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
like
it's
warm air?
It is, yeah.
warm air is fine. I don't use warm air in the summer, but I have the same thing. I have it's a hot or cold fan.
Okay.
So you could use the warm on it. I'm sorry, this is not the beautiful side. Don't bother. So I need to change this up. So when it's all squared off and you can see all of the bits, if you need to pin out any little bits, you can. So you can use individual pins. If I were using individual pins, I would try and get this nice and flat first, and then I tend to pin in at an angle like that. And it's important to check your pins. We sell pins that are non-rustable. It's important to check your pins for that. If you buy them or if you just have T-pins from some other reason, make sure, so pin them and wet them without a sweater attached to make sure that they do not rust before you use them. So what this does though is it allows it to dry flat. That looks a little swampy. Like now I can look at it and I can say, okay, I really need to get something over here because this needs to pull out. That looks inches longer. So that's 10.
and that's 9. So I need to pull this whole side out more to be at the right length. Yeah. So that needs to go to there. So I need to get another blocking mat. So you can measure out all of your parts. You can make sure that it's still the same measurement across. Now it's a little bit wider than it was here. So you can make adjustments as you go. So I could move this over an inch probably. And that is essentially what blocking is about. Any questions? And then you leave it to dry. When it's completely dry, you can pick it up and work with it. It will start to curl again. Humidity, just like if you have curly hair, humidity will make your hair curl if you've straightened it. But it allows you to sew things together much more easily because you're not having to struggle against those curling edges.
How long do you normally let it dry for?
Until it's dry.
Well,
If it's 95% humidity, it's gonna take longer. If you're able to put it in a warm room with a warm fan or a warm heat source on it, it will dry faster.
might not, I think that fan it like a couple days because it's two together. And I didn't have a fan going on because I forgot to put my heater there, so it took probably a good couple days. Yeah.
So you want to go back and check it, and you want to check underneath. You want to like reach under and see, is the underside? I have slipped them over. Mark was talking about doing his sweater and not pinning it. So if you have something that's garter stitch or lays flat, if you've already sewn it together, sometimes your sweater lays flat. You don't always have to pin. I have taken things like a towel and just like this, like to keep something from rolling. If I don't have pins, I might put stuff on top of it just to keep the edges flat. I might use a dish towel or a hand towel along the bottom to keep the bottom edge from being roly-poly. But you let it dry completely. Putting a fan on it will make it faster. If you have 2 layers, you do want to probably turn it over. When you turn it over, you may not have to pin it again. You may just be able to, because it'll be dry enough that when you turn it over, it's just to get air on the other side.
So 2 layers doesn't trap moisture. It's not an issue.
It's not an issue. Also, we have these, and some people have drying racks. Like if you do hand wash stuff at home, you might have a drying rack. This is another item. So it looks like this. And this is really for taking care of your sweaters once they're knitted. But it makes it look, I think it makes it look like a Pringles potato chip. No. Oh, I see what happened. So this is a pop-up drying rack. And
The air can get under
the air can get under it. So this is another way.
I like that. Yeah.
So you can lay something to dry, and then if you have a fan, it's getting under and on top of it. So that's a way to, I would launder my sweater this way. I would not block it on that.
Oh, yeah.
So if I were washing my sweater and waiting and wanted to lay it flat to dry, this is a nice way to lay it flat to dry to get it to dry faster. Okay. I tend to use my guest room bed for it if I don't have a guest. And then that way I can close the door. And that's fine. That was blocking. Any questions about that? You can unmute if you want to ask a question.
I just want to say that was very cool.
I feel like Mr. Rogers with the magic. I kind of enjoyed doing that. I wondered how that would work. And that is pretty much all that I had to share today, except that we are coming close to the end of the year. Hi, Linda. Hi, Linda.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm trying to.
Sure.
Sleeves? Are we doing sleeves or we already talked about sleeves already?
We talked about sleeves already.
Last month?
No.
At the beginning of today?
Can you turn your volume down?
Yeah.
So we talked about sleeves at the beginning and we've recorded. But sleeves are very straightforward for this pattern. You're just going to be casting on and doing a ribbing for, you know, that many inches, very similar to the bottom of the sweater. And then each sleeve is increased. Each sleeve is knitted as a piece, like the front and the back, and it's increased on the edges. So we talked a little bit about doing those increases, and there's not really anything particularly challenging about doing these sleeves. Do you have a question?
So yeah, I came in like 4 minutes late. So yeah, you're right. It was fast. I think it was the question is if you're changing the sleeve length, how do you adjust the increase pace? Like if you're making 3/4 sleeves,
So are you shortening or lengthening?
shortening.
Okay. So if you're shortening the sleeve, can you mute again? Let's see. Linda says she's done something terrible to her sweater, to her settings, and it has been the bane of every Zoom I join. So sorry. I think we might want to use the not computer audio. That might be it. Okay. It's our old friend, the paper. So the sleeve is essentially a trapezoid. You cast on the set number of stitches and work in ribbing. And then if you want to make, and I'm actually going to be making my sleeve shorter, the end number of stitches needs to equal that part of your sweater here that we had. So this part needs to equal half of your sleeve. So this A should be here, and there should be another A over there. Does that make sense? This should be wide enough for the part of your arm where it will be around. So if that is not your wrist, if it's your forearm, then you want to make sure that this is at least as wide as your forearm, or the circumference of your forearm. So, you know, if this sweater is on somebody, you want, like, if there's going to be more arm coming out of it, remember this will be folded in half. This is a fold line. So the arm coming out of it should be not too much bigger. If it's at the wrist, that's the narrowest part. If it's on the elbow or further up the sleeve, that might be a little bit wider than the wrist. So your cast on might be a little bit different. You would have to add stitches to make it slightly wider. And then we talked about doing this in the last one when we were adjusting decreases for the neckline. Now it's the same kind of thing. that we're going to be doing increases, but if, let's say that this length is 10 inches, that means this length needs to be 20 inches, right? Because it's 10 inches and 10 inches, 10 inches here and 10 inches here. So your gauge times 2 times A times 2A equals the number of stitches you should end with. And your circumference maybe plus 1 or 2 inches of your arm where you want the sleeve to be. So let's say this was your forearm and your forearm was 10 inches around. So you'd want to have 10 inches here or 12 inches here. Sorry. I'm going to say add a little bit, make it a little bit. It shouldn't be snug unless you want it to be snug. But this isn't a terribly snug sweater. So let's say we make the sleeve a couple of inches wider than your arm. So the difference between this side and this side is 8 inches. So that's, this line is going 4 inches on each side. It's growing by 4 inches. So however many stitches that is for you. So let's do it with a, or do you know your gauge?
Head.
What's it? What is it? No. Okay. So I'm going to do it for instance. With 5 stitches to the inch. With 5 stitches to the inch. Okay. So if we were looking at 5 stitches to the inch and it was 12 inches across that we wanted, we'd start with 60 stitches. So 5 stitches equals 1 inch. We'd start with 60 stitches. And if we wanted to get to 20, we'd want to have 100 up here. Which means on each side, so we'd divide that in half, we'd totally add 40 stitches, but we'd be adding 20 stitches to each side. So this would be the 60 stitches. And then you'd want 20 more to have been added. So you need to know your row gauge, which you should be able to take from your front or your back. And what you need to decide is how often you need to add a stitch on the edge to get 20 stitches increased on each side. Does that make sense? So if your row gauge, so then the other thing you need to know is what's this length in inches. And the width of your sweater, you know the width of your sweater now. So if the width of your sweater is here, you can measure across from arm to arm. So this is the body of the sweater, and you can measure across from arm to arm on your sweater. You might get somebody to help you, because what you'll want to do then is to hold a tape measure in the middle of your neck, hold your arm out, and get an idea of how far out on your arm you want the sleeve to go. So if your sweater is, 25 inches across, then from here to here is 12.5 inches. And you might want your sleeve, just doing a little rough on me, Hold, please. So if I were holding this in the middle of my neck and I was going to the middle of my arm, that total length is about 23 inches. So we're essentially making a piece that looks like that. And if it were 23 inches from here to here minus 12 and a half, then I've got 11 and a half, right? No, 10 and a half inches of sleeve. So that's this length. You're doing it in stockinette. Maybe you're getting 6 stitches to the inch. So that means you'd have 90 rows to increase 20 stitches in. So 20 goes into 90 4.5 times. So you could do your increases every 4th row until you get to the correct number. And that might happen a little bit sooner, and then you could go straight. Or you could go, you know, for a portion and then go at a slight at every 6th row. Just depending on how you want to figure that. But we need to know the numbers to do the actual math. But that's how you would alter the sleeve to be shorter. So the most important things, you need to know how wide is the cast on going to be. If it's not at your wrist, it might be wider. If it's at your bicep or your elbow or your forearm, those are usually wider parts of your body. And then you need to be able to match the same width at the top as twice that arm opening. Because it needs to just fit straight into that arm opening. And then you need to know how far from your midpoint does your sweater go, and how much further past that would you need to go to get to the desired length of your sleeve, because that's the height of your sleeve. Okay. And then it's just figuring out with the gauge what those numbers would be. When you have those numbers, like we did before, you could map it out on gauge graph paper, the 20 and the however many rows, and then we could draw the line and we could get a really accurate idea of what the increases would be. Many times in the pattern, it will be written with a certain number of increases at 4 every 4th row, and that's the way the pattern is written. And then a certain number of the increases after that will be done every 6th row. And that's what gives this slightly different bend in it. And so in some cases, you can just do it every 4th row until you get to the right width, and it comes in pretty close to the actual length of the sleeve. But it will depend on what the angle of this line is going to be compared to your gauge. And I'm actually planning on shortening my sleeves. Another way that it can be done, and I want to bring this up because I think it's actually very interesting from this pattern that they didn't do this. But if this is the sweater, right, we've got the top and it comes down, and then there's the sleeve and it comes out, and this down and sleeve and comes out. You could pick up all the stitches you need from the sleeve cap. Like we could seam this shoulder and you could pick up all the stitches that you need and work your sleeve in this direction, getting it to decrease. And that way you would have, I mean, you'd still want to know how far out you wanted to go. So you'd still need to know, what that measurement was, if it was 10.5 inches or something else. And you'd want a rough idea of how wide you wanted it to be at the end. But you could then not have to worry about meeting this measurement because you'd already have picked up those stitches. If I had written the pattern, that's how I would do the sleeve, because I find it much easier to pick up stitches and go in that direction. However, many patterns are written with setting in sleeves. And so I wanted to give us a chance to actually practice that. So I am not going to be doing my sleeves that way, even though I'm tempted. I'm going to be knitting them a little bit shorter because I made such a wide sweater. I don't want to have my sleeves go as long as their sleeves go because I want them to be right at my wrist or a little bit above my wrist. So I'm going to do like a bracelet length. And that means I'm going to be shortening my sleeves a little bit too. Thank you for asking that. I appreciate it. Does that help answer your question? I see, got it, thanks. So is that thumbs up? Okay. All right. I'm sorry about your audio. Does anybody have any other questions?
So I was checking my pattern just to double check because you kept saying ribbing. I don't have any there's no ribbing on mine. So I'm assuming that there's a fold over that we'll have to do and tack down.
No, hello, I thought it was ribbed. Hold, please.
I don't think it matters, but I just want to double check. When I double checked and read it, I'm like, nope, there was no ribbing.
There's no ribbing at all? Oh. So did they have you start with the smaller needles?
Yes.
Okay, so they're having you start with the smaller needles. I don't know if there's a fold over.
I mean, I think I don't think it really
There's
it
ribbing
curls a little bit, but that's fine.
There is ribbing on the hooga. One, so the thicker one has ribbing. Sleeves. Mine have ribs. Is that just the hooga one? Or maybe I was only looking at the hooga one. Knit one.
Yeah, mine.
You are quite correct. So they use the
Yeah.
smaller needles for the first 2 inches.
Right.
And then they change to the larger needles. And they do their increase rows every so many rows.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the thinner yarn versions, they fold the sleeves in half to the wrong side and tack along the marked row. So
Okay.
they do have a folded edge. So there is no ribbing, but you do the first 2 on a slightly smaller needle.
Yep. And that's what I did. I just wanted to make sure didn't.
You
I mean,
did.
I read again, and I'm like, all right. I didn't think I misread it.
So but you can rib if you prefer.
Right.
So if you like a ribbed edge, you can do that. If you don't like a ribbed edge, you can have the folded over cuff.
I am open to something different. So
I think it's kind of fun. So we'll be working on the tacking down and doing that. So it will be nice to have all of your pieces blocked by the time we get to that. So we'll be working on finishing for November and December.
Well, yeah, I should have these 2 babies done in time to block everything. So
we will hold, please. Going back to like looking at you. We will in November do the shoulders, which will be knit because the shoulders are still on holders. So we will be knitting them together with the 3 needle bind off. And then we will seam the sleeve, and that will be November. And then December will be the finishing the underarm sleeve. So the under sleeve. And if anybody wants to go ahead. But when we seam a sleeve, we always go into the armpit. And when we seam the side of a sweater, we always want to go into the armpit. So the temptation to just go like this is strong, resist. And the reason I say that is if there's any adjusting to do, you want to do it here, not at your edges, because your edges are completely visible. So when I do my sleeves, I make sure my hems line up if I'm seaming the sleeve together, and that if I have any extra, going on, that it's in my armpit and not at my edge. And the same for the hem. So even though it would be super easy to just go one day, from end to end, that will result in potentially a very distorted edge at the hem, at your hip, where you don't want it. Okay. So I know all of you like to go ahead, but I just want to put that caution out there, because I had a customer come in who had been seaming from cuff to hem, and there was a terrible discrepancy between one side and the other, and it did not look good, and she was going to have to redo the whole thing, and it was a little distressing for everybody to see that happen. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to share my screen again, and this time I'm going to share Ravelry, because I want to show you what is going to be our first. We're going to do cardigans. So Sweater Club next year is going to be 2 cardigan sweaters. And the first one, somebody was like, this one's boring. This is classic. It's not boring. This is a modifiable cardigan pattern. You can do it with a longer sleeve or a bracelet length sleeve, and that's pushed up, but it is a bracelet length sleeve. This is done in a mohair and non-mohair blend held together, but you can do it in just regular yarn. You could do it in 2 strands of mohair, which makes a wonderful, lightweight, super warm sweater if you get cold. It is a really pretty cardigan. It's just a very classic looking cardigan with a jewel neckline. And this one is done like this, like the sweater that we're working on right now, the Wren sweater. It's done in pieces. So we will be working on putting all of the pieces together and doing the same kind of finishing. The second sweater for Sweater Club is going to be, I think is going to be this one, the Order of the Garter. And I picked it because it's not dissimilar to the one that I just showed you, but it's in garter stitch. It is top down, and to me, it has the look of a Chanel jacket. So I thought it's a very classic look. It also has applied I-cord edging, which is a nice technique to learn how to do. And it has buttonholes. And so I thought this would be a nice one for us to do as the top down shape as you go sweater. And hopefully it won't be quite as complicated as the Naima. So the Order of the Garter is by 11 Wild Swans, or Anna Maria Otvos. She is the designer of what has always been lovingly called the Big Green Monster. Oh, hello. My grand dog is here. Where's the Big Green Monster? Oh, is it picturesque? It is. I made this sweater for my daughter. It is a top-down cabled textured cardigan, and I made it out of 2 yarns held together for Maeve's graduation. It was meant to be high school graduation. They got it for college graduation. But she's a wonderful designer. This was a fairly complex sweater. I don't think that the Order of the Garter is nearly as complex. I think this is a pretty straightforward, but it's going to be fun and interesting to do this shaping, which looks like a set-in sleeve from the top down and in the round, or not in the round. It'll be back and forth because it's a cardigan, so we're not steeking it. And it's in garter stitch. We will be making a modification. I don't think there's any point in doing the sleeve in the round and alternating between knitting and purling. So we will alternate. We will do flat sleeves and seam them, but that's a very minor detail. So that's what we've got planned for next year. Okay.
Naima wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad, but it was
Fussy. It was just a little fussy.
it was a little fussy, and it was fussy right at the beginning. And it was like, this is not what I envisioned for Sweater Club, the start of Sweater Club. What I envisioned for the start of Sweater Club was more straightforward pieces. So we're going to start with the more straightforward pieces in the quintessential cardigan, and then we'll move to the fussier right at the beginning stuff in the order of the garter.
Naima is one of my favorite sweaters to wear.
It is such a nice sweater.
Really, I didn't enjoy making it partly, but I love wearing it.
I liked making it. I didn't like teaching it.
I'd do it again.
Yeah,
Please let
In a
it
different
please
in a
let-
different way to yarn.
Oh yeah. It works up, like I think soft fun would be really nice for the Naima as like a sweatshirt.
Mhm.
Be a great, it would make a great sweater in the soft fun. I made mine out of cashmere. I love it. I had this stockpile of cashmere from when they discontinued.
I had several. I'm like on video or talking all day, so there was a couple comments on this because I made this during a real stressful go live project, and I'm like, there was a lot of stress stitches in here, and they're like, how long did it take you to do this? I'm like, I did it as part of a club, so I couldn't tell you how many hours, but it was probably, over several months. But I'm like, yeah, I said every stitch was a blood, sweat, and tears. This project. It was not this project, but work project. So
Yeah. Well, I think everybody I've seen who's finished it has really liked their sweater so far. So I hope that I hope you will like the new ones, and I hope you'll
oh
like.
yeah, it looks nice.
I hope
I like nice classic cardigan is always nice to have.
there are a lot of really fun patterns out there, and I was looking at some of the more fun, more like non-traditionally constructed side to side, other kinds of construction. I'm very interested in doing those, but I feel like Sweater Club needs to be more geared towards skill building, and we can do a knit along for something more fun.
Mhm.
So thank you all. So I managed to use all 55 minutes, and
thank you, Beth.
thank you, and have a great week and a great month. So next month you should have all your pieces together, all your pieces finished and ready to at least put the fronts together, the front and the back together. Sorry, I can't talk. So ideally that's what we're going to work on, is the 3-needle bind off, and then
Right.
setting in the sleeves or at least one of the sleeves. I'm going to demonstrate with one side. You're going to have to do the other side. And then
Okay.
and then the next time we're going to work on the seams and doing the joining of the seams, and that way we'll have worked through mattress stitching, stitch to row. When we set in the top of the sleeve, it will be stitches to rows, and then rows to rows when we go down the sides. And that's 2 ways that the mattress stitch gets done. So that will be, I think, really important. And then I'll talk about finishing and weaving in ends. And we've talked about blocking already, but we could also look at maybe steaming the sweater once it's all the way finished. Okay.
Why did I use hand spun that's not nice and regular?
You made it.
So it's gonna, yeah, but it's not even. There's big ones, little ones, So,
Well,
but that happens on regular yarn too.
it happens in regular yarn, and when you block it, that will regulate it as much as you can, and then it will be beautiful and rustic in its own way.
I always make sweaters for Shrek.
Sweaters for ogres.
Yeah, they always come out rustic, but that's okay.
I think it'll be beautiful.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Have a
Great.
wonderful month and we'll see you in November. All right. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.